Malhotran. He says that these corporations, like pharma, for example, they often, in the way that they conduct their business, behave like a psychopathic entity, like psychopaths. So, what does that mean? Callous disconcern for the safety of others. Nobody should be taking, in my view, this vaccine. The question is, how did this all happen? And the only way to really explain it is to take a step back. I'm a root cause guy, right?
So, Aseem Malhotra, thank you for coming for this interview. I once heard you say in Tucker Carlson or somewhere that you regard a corporation as being a psychopathic being. Do you still think this way?
Yeah, I think the actual definition of psychopath, one of the men behind that international classification is a doctor called Robert Hare, who's a forensic psychologist. And he actually, before I said it, in fact I was actually referencing him, he said that big corporations often, the way that they conduct their business, fulfill the criteria for psychopathy as legal entities. So callous unconcern for the safety of others, incapacity to experience guilt, deliberately lying, deceitfulness, conning others for profit. These are some of the characteristics of a psychopath, and that is absolutely how much of what big corporations do in terms of whether it's in terms of selling their particular products fulfills that criteria. So absolutely, yeah.
Why do you think it is so?
Why? I think this has happened very gradually over probably decades through legal maneuvers. The corporations are pathologically self-interested entities, so they are there just to extract money, and they're happy to exploit people, manipulate people, deceive people for that purpose. And over time, they have, as any pathological entity will do, they have done everything they can to gain more and more power. So this is really just a result of the economic system.
Yeah. So in this court case that Mika Vauhkalan has raised against Finnish, well, there is a corporation, Fazeria. It's not much about the big matter, a cup of coffee, but actually it is much larger thing. And it seems now that this Finnish state is trying to fight back, not even looking at these facts, what I heard so far happening. Do you think that it means that the whole society is turning psychopathic?
So I think I've described this actually in an article in talks I've given that was actually written up by the editor-in-chief of The Lancet, Richard Horton. And I talk about something called the commercial determinants of health first, which is strategies and approaches adopted by the private sector to promote products and choices that are harmful or detrimental to health. I have now I've come up with a new terminology called the psychopathic drivers of health, right? So if we understand that at the root of what's influencing our decision-making, our behavior, how we see the world, those entities are psychopathic in nature. To put it more mildly, maybe commercial or materialistic. But to answer your question more specifically, what's happened is I think the downstream effect is that at the very least we have corporatized human beings. And I think that is, again, part of the problem, but also once you understand the problem, then you can offer solutions.
Yes. And then second thing is that what has happened now during COVID is that there's a huge crime, and in my opinion this crime came from somewhere on top, in United States or somewhere. And I've noticed, for example, in Finland that most government officials, the health officials, they seem to believe actually this what is coming from the top. And I would say that this has resulted that most of the people in the civil society, or doctors and journalists, they are somehow part of the crime. So what do you think, what can we do about this, to decide that who is a criminal in this case, who has got the responsibility, as it is spread all over? This might be a quite difficult question.
Well, I think to some degree we are all part of the system, so we all have a role to play to sort it out. The system is the crime. If one wants to be more specific, of course, and that will play out over time, is that I think there is a very strong possibility that the drug companies pushing these vaccines should have known that their vaccines were going to cause considerable harm, at the very least. And once they were aware, and that the data started to emerge even after the rollout, what they've always done, is that they do everything to suppress that information and to maximize profits. So if you look at specific examples historically, drug companies have been fined billions. Most of the top 10 drug companies have been fined tens of billions of dollars over 2 or 3 decades for committing fraud, illegal marketing of drugs, hiding data on harms. And that what's happened now in relation to the COVID vaccine and these other drug companies is just an extension of what's been happening historically, but most people aren't aware of it, and they don't realize that whenever these fines have been levied against these companies, nothing has really changed in the system to stop these crimes being committed again. And that's why we are where we are. And I analysed this in detail and wrote about it actually in a 2-part paper in the Journal of Insulin Resistance, a medical journal that was peer-reviewed, to actually explain to people not just about the best available evidence on the benefits and harms of the vaccine, which ultimately for me I concluded it needs to be stopped because the harms outweigh the benefits, certainly now, but also how we got here, why we got here, and then solutions moving forward.
How do you feel about the average doctor or government health official in Western countries? That how qualified are they to know the true deeper problems of this vaccine?
I think the first thing to say is medical knowledge is under commercial control, but most doctors don't know that. So the reason the system perpetuates itself is because of lack of awareness. Because I honestly believe most doctors are the type of people that would, first of all, they genuinely go into the profession to help their patients. 2, they tend to be people who are relatively intelligent and hardworking. And 3, they tend to be people that go into the profession because they also have a very strong adherence to to ethics, to ethical behavior. So this is unwitting, it's not deliberate, but they have trusted information to be evidence-based or to be true, when in fact it's been manipulated for the purposes of money.
Yes, and thinking about that, then coming back to this guilt question, that who has got the responsibility? Where can we draw the line? Because now
we all have the responsibility, Sammy. The people, members of the public that know there's something going on and aren't willing to speak out, they have a responsibility. Doctors who are seeing people with vaccine injuries but are too afraid, they are responsible. The drug companies that have withheld data on harms are responsible. The regulators that take money from industry and should have done a better job properly, they are responsible. The governments who should have done due diligence before introducing COVID passes to make sure that the information they were receiving was independently verified, they are also we're all responsible, Samuel, all of us.
That means that it is quite a difficult situation because such a large amount of people are actually should be in court. What to do about that?
Well, I think that legal part of the solution is changes in the law. I think more important than getting people in court is actually ensuring that the system is changed. There's an acceptance we made a mistake. First of all, the establishment, the government, the health bodies need to say we made a big mistake here. This is why the mistake happened, and we are going to now introduce new measures to make sure this never happens again. Having said that, those people who were in those positions that should have known better and done better, they can no longer stay in those positions. At the very least, they should step down and resign. But they need to do it on the background of, we got this very, very wrong. We're so sorry. New structures new laws need to be in. We will not solve this problem, Sammy, with the economic system until there are changes in the law. And to put it very simply, there is this concept called the free market. Have you heard of this? Yeah? Free market. So people think this is a good thing, right? We should have a free market. It sounds great. What does it actually, in reality, translate into? Free market means that people should be allowed to, innovate and to help produce products or ideas or drugs that are going to benefit society. But the reality is that free market doesn't exist. It's a myth. It's a fraud. It's a freedom to manipulate, freedom to deceive, freedom to exploit, and freedom to dominate market. And actually, it's even counterintuitive to market economics, because Adam Smith, who is one of the brainchilds or proponents of the liberal economic model, the free market, said markets function best on perfect information and relative equality. In most countries in the Western world, I know Finland has done very well, but in most countries in the Western world, we have increasing socioeconomic disparities, right? So we're having more inequality, the opposite, and we have the opposite of perfect information. We have fraudulent information. It doesn't take a rocket scientist, Sami, to figure out that the economic system is at the root of the problem.
Coming back to the situation now, that I heard Gerd van den Bossche said that these people on the top, or these government officials and doctors and so on, they are actually forming kind of a mafia, because they are, it seems now, at least to me, that they are defending themselves and using law again, which is seen in this court case, that they are not even trying to defend with facts. They actually trying to defend with keeping up with this disinformation. So do you think that how could we start unraveling this, that to dismantle this mafia? How to get this? Should we start forgiving them in some states, that they would somehow come back to the, from the dark side to the good side?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that need to be done. I think, but the core of it all is actually people not feeling afraid to speak the truth, and allowing people to speak up, and using the power of our words and speech to influence and change the minds of those people that we see as potentially the enemy. Right? I genuinely believe most people are intrinsically good. I think a lot of these people in the system that have perpetuated this issue, they're doing it from a place of ignorance. They need to be educated, and that means everybody really speaking out and acting from a place of virtue and courage, and that will shift the dial as we move forward.
And that is actually what makes this system psychopathic, because it seems to be it is quite easy when you are in an institution. It's quite easy to be ignorant. You just let the institution take the blame. So I don't know how to fix that problem.
Well, what we're dealing with really at the heart of it is we have a tyranny, okay, a corporate tyranny. And a tyranny emerges when people are afraid to say what they think. And, to paraphrase or to quote Jordan Peterson, the clinical psychologist, when you have something to say, silence is a lie.
Yes.
And when everybody lies all the time, the tyranny is complete.
Yes.
So the solution is within us. Basically, people need to just grow a pair of balls.
Yes.
Because it's not just about acting from a place of virtue for the sake of acting from a place of virtue. It is a rational reason to speak the truth, because if we don't speak the truth, the situation is only going to get more problematic. And we know that the world, I come from a health perspective, I'm obviously a practicing cardiologist, but we are now seeing lots of data of declining, and even before the pandemic, declining mental and physical well-being. So our societies are regressing. We are going backwards, physically and mentally. And that's because of these system failures. So it is in our interest, and the children, even if it's not in our interest in our lifetime, we have to think of our children to make sure we can do everything we can to make sure that we shift the dial towards positivity, towards good versus, more to the brighter side, the lighter side than the dark side.
Do you see, are you hopeful, or do you see many doctors or government officials, do you see them getting better?
Oh, massively. It's hugely changed. I think one of the markers, objective markers, that the information is getting out to the masses, if you look certainly in the UK and US, the percentage of people who are actually ignoring medical advice to come for boosters is in the single percentage figures. There's a massive shift. There was one survey done in America that 57% of Americans felt that the excess deaths in the US is something to do with the COVID vaccines. That's extraordinary. That is a reflection of people standing up, and more alt media rather than legacy media responsible for that. That the truth is being disseminated by a number of people around the world, and it's having huge impact. But we have to keep going, and eventually there will be a tipping point where the establishment will either completely collapse and have to admit that they've got a problem. My biggest concern, Sami, however, is that the longer it takes for them to acknowledge this, the greater the chance. And I don't say this because I'm very much somebody who believes in non-violence and non-violent resistance. But my concern, unless they resolve this very soon, is this could result in violence and bloodshed when enough people know what's actually happening, and that we should stop happening. I saw yesterday, I was very concerned, there was a video of apparently the former health minister of Italy now has bodyguards because he is being approached and harassed in the street and being called murderer because of his introduction of the CaseCovidPass, for example. Yes. So this is not a good thing.
Yes. Yeah, in Finland it is not quite yet happening. Yet is people getting to know what is going on. And I noticed regretfully that in the Finnish officials there are very few doctors here that are coming out.
Yeah, I think to understand about the doctors as well, doctors are hierarchical and obedient, which of course is a risk factor for abuse of power. And the issue is that the medical establishment that they are following orders from, most of them believe that they are people who are good people, they're independent, and they analyze the data independently. And unfortunately, those people have let us down very, very badly.
I noticed also that when I did research in the third world countries, doctors, they used ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, and they did their own thing. So is there a big difference between Western countries and, let's say, all these poorer countries in this regard?
It's difficult to say objectively. I haven't looked at that data to be able to say there's a big difference. I think a lot of the traditional medical practices of the West have now permeated the East, and I know that because I have doctor friends and relatives and friends of my father who are in India who practice medicine. I think there's a greater appreciation in the East, though, of alternative ways of looking after people's health, which comes from things like Ayurveda in India, understanding that your health isn't determined by a doctor, but it's actually determined by your social and environmental exposures. And that's a narrative that needs to shift as well more in the West. I mean, that if you look at the data and the information, 80%, certainly when it comes to heart disease, 80% of heart disease is socially and environmentally determined. Right? That is, the conditions in which we are born, grow, live, work, and age. It's about chronic stress. It's about poor diet. It's about being sedentary. It's about degradation of interpersonal relationships. That drives disease. And that is and the solution to the modern problems actually are there.
Mm. Yeah, it's all about starting to think to yourselves, and I don't know, how do you trust what is a good medical information now, if you are a common person?
It's very difficult. It's very difficult to know what to trust. I think we have to always go with our intuition at the time, and I think people, I wouldn't put it on people's own responsibility. It's not their responsibility because we are supposed to trust our doctors. So the medical profession needs to get their act in order so that people can feel more confident in trusting information from doctors. But right now I completely empathize why they're confused and they don't know who to trust. You have to ultimately just make a decision and go with your intuition.
Yes. So what is your intuition about the mRNA vaccines now? That what is the most concerning thing about them, because at the moment we know quite a lot about.
I think the question should be, what is not concerning about them? This is the most, in my whole career and everything I know about the history of medicine, this is the most horrific medical product that I think we will witness in a lifetime. It is driving and has a potential to drive every single disease within the human body. And interestingly, that I'm not just saying that out of speculation. The World Health Organization themselves actually produced a list when the vaccine was being rolled out of potential serious adverse events from the vaccine, and every organ system was affected. Every organ system. Heart, brain, kidneys, liver, intestines, mental health, all of it.
The WHO is developing through all its nations, but with the WHO director
Talk about the World
States in
Health
charge,
Organization, as you said.
and amendments to the
Mary Nash
existing
said that it
international
can't be
health
fixed.
regulations
Should we just get rid of it, or can we still use it as a platform in the future too?
I think the World Health Organization historically have actually been a very good organization, but things started to change when they started to get more and more commercial influence. What many people don't know, I was a campaigner on introduction of sugary drinks tax in the UK. I was one of the lead campaigners globally highlighting the harms of excess sugar. I did it through mainstream media and medical journals. And in the early 2003, there was already enough evidence to suggest that we were consuming too much sugar, and the World Health Organization wanted to change the guidelines to reduce the maximum required limit of sugar consumption. And before they did that, they were lobbied by the United States government, George Bush's government, to say that if you do this, we're going to withdraw funding from you because of lobbying from Coca-Cola. And they didn't change the guidance because of that. That was 20 years ago, right? So the point is, we want the World Health Organization to exist if it is acting in our best interests, and that can only happen if it is free from commercial influence. Health decisions should never, ever, ever, ever have any commercial influence. By definition, it is debasing, clinical medicine. It is undermining the doctor-patient relationship, introducing a bias when there shouldn't be a bias. There is no role for commercialism within health. Certainly when it comes to, because what happens is it leads to exploitation of patients for the purposes of money. And actually the best example of that is the United States. That's a natural experiment in what happens when you completely commercialize the healthcare system. What do you have now? Greatest health expenditure in the Western world, $4.3 trillion, with the worst health outcomes. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out the problem.
Yeah, it might take a rocket scientist to figure out how do we do medical research without commercial, without money. That would.
No, you can have. So I think the way to do it, solutions moving forward, is of course money is required for purposes of research, but money should not influence the implementation or the distribution of that product for the purposes of profit making. People need to be given the full transparent information. So the way that happens is, fine, people can make money. Of course, people need to make money to live by producing something very innovative or game-changing. But the people who evaluate the benefits and harms of that product cannot have any financial tie to it. And that doesn't exist at the moment. So what we would do is we would say, okay, drug companies can, for example, this is one of my solutions in my paper, they should be allowed to develop drugs, for sure, but they shouldn't be allowed to test them. The testing needs to be done independently.
Yeah.
Because and the reality is, Sammy, if you're producing a really good fucking product, pardon my language, if it's that great, why don't you allow someone else to independently evaluate it? Like, if it's going to be that great, then fine. But the problem is most drugs now that are produced in the last 20 years are copies of old ones. All they do is they take an old generic product, they change molecules here and there, they then rebrand it, patent it, make lots of money, huge waste in the system. And actually more drugs are produced, according to some data, that are double the amount of drugs have been produced that have caused more harm than good. So the overall net effect of the pharmaceutical industry on society in the last 2 decades has been negative. I can't think of a single drug, and I'm willing to be corrected even if there's one, but I can't think of a single drug, Sammy, in the last 20 years that has actually improved people's lifespan.
Okay. Yeah, that does mean that there's something wrong.
But again, most people don't know this.
Yes.
They'll be hearing for the first time and they will be shocked.
Yeah, and I guess it is also that media is also so
Captured.
they are afraid to speak about these matters because everything goes that if you say something against medicine, that means that you are trying to harm people. This is what I've seen all the time.
Yeah, and that's a deliberate PR strategy by the big pharma, is to use what we call a straw man argument. So if someone's having a nuanced discussion, for example, about statin drugs, cholesterol-lowering drugs, and I've been a big advocate for informed consent, to say that tell people the benefits and harms based upon best evidence, not making the data up, clear, even drug industry sponsored evidence, which is again not, we have to take with a pinch of salt. They have, the way to frame someone like me is to say this guy is saying don't take statins at all, or he's a statin denier. So it's using a straw man argument. So what that means is you take an extreme version of someone's opinion and then use that against them.
Yeah, that's what I see. So about this Mika Vauhkalan's court case, that I guess there really isn't too many court cases like this in the world.
No, I think this is the first one I'm aware of.
Yeah.
And good on Mika for dedicating his entire life pretty much for the last 2 years
At the moment, yes, almost,
to this particular case, absolutely.
What do you think happens if he loses this? I mean, this might mean that very few people would dare to do this again, because, well, actually, or do we need to do court cases, lots of court cases, to get out of this problem?
I think the courts are definitely part of the solution, for sure. when you speak the truth, you got to let go of the outcome. I think if the case is lost, then it can then go to appeal, it can go to the next court, etc. You can take it to the European Court of Human Rights. He's not going to stop, and I'm not going to stop either. Even if we lose a battle, we're not going to lose a war.
Still one more thing. If getting back to this, what Gerd van der Bosch said about this mafia, do you see this kind of pull that if people are talking about Nuremberg 2.0 and court cases, do you see that it might mean that these people who are there up there, who are part of this crime, that they become a bit scared of coming out? Or should we give them some sort of
olive branch?
Yeah,
offer them
olive
some
branch, yes. Yeah.
It's a difficult question. I think my personal view is, having spoken to people who have been part of pushing the vaccine, including politicians, who are shocked when I explain information to them, I suspect that I don't believe genuinely that there is a so-called mafia. I think what's happened is it's human nature. People get to positions of power. They have a certain way of thinking, an ideology. I think the big hindrance for many people is lack of humility, certainly in medicine. And if you lack humility, then you are not going to, you're less likely to change your mind and be open to new ideas. And I think that's unfortunately, again, part of the culture. So it's more of a cultural problem rather than a specific mafia. I mean, I wouldn't personally describe it as a mafia. I can understand why people would say that. And I have been a victim. Don't get me wrong. I have been a victim of medical persecution for over a decade. Okay, and they've tried to ruin my career. But I look at their behavior through a lens that they're just ignorant and confused. Because I don't think there's anything productive to try and treat this with anger. I think we have to do this through dialogue, and we have to convince these people that there is a better way, even for them.
Yeah, it seems to me that this whole COVID thing is quite a teaching for humanity. Yeah, quite. We need to see what is important, and exactly this humility is part of it.
I think we're at a crossroads. I think where the world, if we don't get this sorted now, that we are heading towards oblivion, complete oblivion, annihilation, maybe even World War III, all related to this stuff.
Yes.
We have to stop it.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Aseem Malhotra.
Thank you.
Thank you.